44-year-old successful entrepreneur, faithful husband, competent father of a 16-year-old boy, a man with the stolidity of half his life behind him, and the certainty of what lay ahead, should wait every morning for a glimpse of this girl like a teenager in the first throes of an infatuation. He would have liked nothing better than to stand there observing how long she walked, where she went afterwards, but his morning routine dictated otherwise. Gayatri, already showered and dressed, juggled a blackberry and a piece of multigrain toast between her fingers. They had an established morning routine. Gayatri had to be dropped off at her office, which was on the way to his own. Varun, aren't you ready yet? We're going to be late. I have an early morning meeting with Jay. I told you yesterday that I had to leave by 8:15. If you aren't ready in 10 minutes, I'm leaving. He didn't know if it were a plea or a threat. He read both in her voice. Then leave, I'll go later. Fine. Tell Jagdish to come back here after he drops you. Fine. The words, spat out at him like cherry pits into the wind, carried a faint whiff of accusation. So that sort of gives you an idea of how things are between Gayatri and Varun after 17 years of marriage. So I know you've been married recently.
Well, that's relative, considering I've been with the guy that I've been married for over a decade.
So what is marriage like these days? Is it an outdated institution? And I see a lot of people thinking, we will live together. Why do we need to get married? So what do you think about that?
Well, I think when it comes to children, it's better if the parents are married. I am not opposed to the idea of cohabitation. In fact, I quite propound it, to be very honest. But definitely, I think if you're going to bring children into this world, you should be married. That's my old school way of looking at it. But I think today, the dynamics of urban, metropolitan married lives are under immense strain. And that strain is visible in one way or the other in everybody's marriage. It's how you're able to overcome that strain that really is the secret of marriage, I think.
Yes. And that's really the next question. So when there is a couple like Gayatri and Varun and they know it's not working well and it's not going well and they're just hanging in there. So how do we overcome? No, I'm saying we just erase that. How does one overcome the strain of such a marriage?
See, I think it's important to first look into the factors that lead to such a strain, to be very honest. You start with an environment where ordinarily, if you look, let's say 20, 30 years ago, you didn't have these factors that led to your, which gave you opportunities to put this kind of a strain on your marriage. For instance, there was no text messaging. I mean, today people have multiple relationships on text messages. It's become a new way of conducting your life. So you could be sitting with your wife, faithful to her, but you could be unfaithful to her or him, or your husband rather, on an SMS relationship. Is that fidelity? And where does infidelity start? Does it start with thought or is it with action? So we don't have all these tools that were that could give you and aid you in straining your relationship. Life was pretty simple, you had to work harder. Today technology has made your life easier. You could be on holiday with your spouse and yet be at work. So that also brings its own kind of strain. Husband and wife are busy on their Blackberries, attending to work or other things at the same time. So, and also I think the environment is such that earlier work environments were either male dominated or female dominated. Usually women chose professions like teaching and counseling, which tended for them to interact with other women. But increasingly the workforce and the workplace is becoming a mix of both sexes, which again wasn't the case maybe a decade or 2 decades ago. And now you're at work everywhere, whether you're a salesperson at a store like Crossword or you're an executive or a corporate trainer like Nirupama, you're constantly going to have both the sexes. And monogamy, I firmly believe, is an imposition. It's not a choice. It's something which society created to keep things in order. Otherwise, there'd be chaos. Men would be fighting with other men over their women. Because eventually, how does it work in the animal kingdom? It's all about fighting and the alpha male and the alpha female. So I think to bring a degree of order to society, monogamy has been imposed on us. And when you let people loose in an environment where potentially that is challenged, you're back in the jungle. And when you're back in the jungle, jungle-like things happen. And when you control them, then there's a strain. My God, that was a long relationship. and a long explanation.
And that's pretty much what happens.
How clever am I, Nirupama?
Without reading, you know exactly what's going to happen. And there is, you know, a line from the book itself, which I now recall, that Varun sees monogamy as a necessary condition, and it is not something which is out of choice. And he's against what he calls the rigors of compulsory cohabitation.
I agree.
Yeah. Okay. So the question is, yes, but people do want to have, you know, children, and they want to have a degree of stability. And I think what the book also talks about is viewing adultery or infidelity with more understanding and compassion.
And openness.
Openness, exactly. So this has happened, and the question is, what do we do after this? So a lot of the book is about the pursuit.
Of Sweetie.
Of Sweetie,
oh.
yes.
Okay.
So Sweetie is the heroine. She's young.
Oh, I thought Gayatri would be the heroine. Why is Sweetie the heroine?
Gayatri is the wife.
So no, Sweetie is the other woman. She is the vamp.
She's not the vamp,
No?
she's sweet.
Okay, because that's another thing, you see. Proverbially, the person who tends to be the object of attention of the committed man, or the committed, it's always the committed man. It's never the committed woman, because that's to be your next book, actually. The committed woman finding somebody younger outside, or whatever.
So she is, you know, the interesting thing about Sweetie and the way I wrote her is she is the other woman, but she's a very normal, typical housewife. She's a good Punjabi girl.
That's my Sweetie.
Sweetie Singh.
Oh, Sweetie Singh, okay.
Married to Amandeep Singh, who's a businessman, but he keeps traveling, and she's been in a joint family. So Amandeep has two elder brothers, and they have their wives and they have kids. She's been in a typical business joint family. She's yearned to get away and form the nuclear family. And now finally she's landed up in Trafalgar Towers, which is this, and she's living the kind of life she wants to, looking after her kids, being a good wife, but still it's not enough. So the other thing is, I think the families are also changing. The joint family, or being a part of a joint family, is no longer the norm. More and more people are moving away from that.
Why do you think that's the case?
Yes, and that's really the question. Why do you think that is the case? So in the book, the case is really a desire to be independent and to explore. But also paradoxically, Gayatri, who is now in her 40s, wants to go back and look after her parents. So she's the only daughter, no brothers, only child, and she wants to go back to the parental home, and she wants to stay with her parents and look after them because they are old and they are ailing. So it's interesting. On one hand, you do have people moving away from the family, and there are people like Gayatri and Varun, and I know them, some of my neighbors, who've come back to India after several years abroad because their parents are getting old and they want to take care of them. So it's interesting.
That's a paradox.
Yes, exactly. So I think that's the interesting thing about Indian society, and I think in Gurgaon we see a lot of that, is this huge paradox. People wanting to break away, and yet after a certain age wanting to, you know, come back and be there for their parents. So we can't, I think we are, that family, the great Indian family value, I don't know whether it's undergoing some change or whether it is exactly the same.
I think it's definitely undergoing a change, because as people become more and more independent, as there are more sources of revenue in a particular family, there's reason to go out there and set up your own home. Traditionally, that was always a bit of a grey area. So there was a family pool, and you lived together to help people who were starting out because maybe they couldn't afford their own home. But since everybody today is independent, husband, wives in most cases also work, so there's an easier way out.